So good morning, everyone. My name is Sam. I'm an architect. I work in IB, International Development. But the reason I'm talking today is because in 2019, I spent 4 months in Bazar in Bangladesh, working on the Rohingya response. And I was there as technical coordinator in the shelter and advice sector. So in that role, some of you will know that role very well, I'm sure, but in that role, I worked with government and NGO partners to develop various types of guidance. So we did guidance, for example, on voucher distribution systems, on soil testing. We looked at standards for shelters, and we also looked at bamboo, because in the Rohingya response, as many of you will know, bamboo is the dominant shelter material. And it's used to construct shelters, but also large scale buildings and also civil engineering work. So it's a kind of ubiquitous material in that response. The other opportunity I had when I worked there was to co-author the 3-year strategy paper with colleagues in the sector. And as part of that, we looked at what are some of the implications of using a very dominant material in a large scale response. And we came up with a tentative proposal for how we might tackle that, which I'll come back to later. But I think the sort of key observation is that an awful lot of effort has gone into making conditions in that camp or in those camps as comfortable as possible for refugees. But change is gradual. It's a very complicated, complex environment, so it's difficult to actually enact change perhaps as quickly as people might want to do so. So this topic of working at scale with low impact materials is one that certainly at that time I was thinking about a lot. And I come back to periodically. And so I was asked to share some observations on the experience of working in Cox's Bazar and the experience of working with bamboo at that scale. So the 3 observations that I'm going to talk about. Well, actually, I should say, well, I wanted to put this in because I know there's people with various different experience levels probably in that environment, and actually the observations that I'm going to share with you are probably not particularly novel. Some of you will be thinking about these things already, and some of you may have already enacted measures to make change in that environment. But I think nonetheless, it's useful for us to keep thinking about these issues, to reflect on them so we can keep the lessons of these experiences present in our mind. And I guess that's what today is also for. So I'm going to reflect on 3 topics. These slides, by the way, they're kind of there to demonstrate a sort of impression of the environment. They don't necessarily correlate spectacularly with what I'm saying, but they'll give you a sense of the environment if you haven't been there yourself. So I'm going to share about 3 topics. The first one is to do with sourcing raw materials. The second is to do with bringing material to site, and the third is to do with the consequences of using material and how those consequences change as the response starts to scale up. I'll conclude by introducing one initiative, which took place in camps in 2019, or I think probably even before that, to start to address issues. And also one proposal, which goes back to that strategy paper. I guess overarching all of this is a sense in my mind that I have that I need to keep thinking about the unintended consequences of the decisions I make when it comes to materials and working, particularly at this sort of scale, this sort of environment. So in terms of sourcing raw materials, you don't want a blank screen, let's go back to that. In terms of sourcing raw materials, I don't know if this is the latest data, but as far as I understand it, 80% of bamboo sourced for the camps is available from managed supplies. That's good, but that still leaves 20% of material which is not coming from managed supplies. And when you think about the camps, the way I sort of think about them is they're like a large city of low-rise bamboo structures, 800,000, 900,000 people. 20% of that supply is still a considerable amount, and there presumably is some kind of environmental price to pay for that 20%, even if you're getting many supplies from plant sources. And a response as large as this one, it creates a demand for material, and that places a stress on the available supply. This is a challenge because at a certain point, the stress may start to affect the availability or quality of the material, or it may encourage bad actors to exploit land that was not set aside for farming this material. So there's been an ongoing need to replace bamboo in the camps, to maintain and repair structures, or to rebuild structures that have been destroyed by landslides, floods, fires. There's all sorts of hazards in that environment, and it happens very frequently. So demand, high demand means that the bamboo may be harvested at inappropriate times, and that can affect also the quality and the durability of the material. So this sort of impact is difficult to predict at the outset of an emergency, I think, particularly when, certainly in my case, humanitarian actors may not have a huge amount of understanding about the specific material properties, the materials they're being used when they start working in that environment. I think an understanding of bamboo progressively got better and better over the years with the Rohingya response, but probably, and again in my case, it was something I had to learn rather than something I came to the response with. And also, I think, in the immediate aftermath of an emergency, thinking about some of these issues is difficult because the priorities are elsewhere. But I think the sooner we can start to consider some of these unintended consequences, we can start to put in place measures that may offset some of the more negative impact. I think on the flip side, the high demand for bamboo created a market, and once this market is in place, that can be leveraged to create economic opportunities for the host community. And if you're able to do that, you could potentially help the host community generate income in a way that may offset some of the negative perspectives or views they may have towards the refugee community. So there's opportunities there that can be exploited, and it's not a zero-sum game. I think, in order to get a balanced approach to this kind of problem, you need to, again, be thinking about it as soon as possible and being aware that you need to think about it as soon as possible so you can anticipate those unintended consequences. My second observation is to do with bringing materials to site. Those of you who've worked in the camps will be familiar with the journey from Cox's Bazar to the camps and kind of features that you see when you take that journey in terms of the road network and the traffic and such like. The camps were built in a rural location, so as the scale of the camps increased, the more bamboo was required, so the transportation infrastructure required to supply the bamboo to the camp also became more extensive. Now, this is not a problem necessarily just for bamboo. If you were using different materials, you would still have to be able to transport them to the site. So it's not a specific case in relation to bamboo, but it is still something that we can be aware of and we can be thinking about. And if we project forward from a response, knowing that more people will be arriving and the response will get bigger and bigger, we can start to look beyond the site itself and see if we can anticipate how we might deal with some of these challenges. So, for example, the demand for bamboo leads to overload of trucks. In the worst case, these present a hazard to road users and people in the surrounding communities. In the best case, it's noise pollution, air pollution, and they stress the existing road network. So, and this causes a huge amount of disruption to people on the routes from the Cox's Bazar to the site. The third observation or reflection is it's really about the consequences of using material as the response evolves. So, in the case of Cox's Bazar, what I think about is sort of increasing density and then fire risk. I guess there's other hazards that will also come into play if you're increasing that density, but particularly for me, fire seems the one that's a useful illustration of this point. When the response started, you probably saw from the earlier image that it was a rural location. There was more physical space between shelters, fewer people on the site. But as you get progressively more people, those shelters start to come closer together, the physical space is lessened, and suddenly a material which may be entirely appropriate for use when you've got fewer people, it starts to become a fire hazard in a way that it wasn't maybe previously, and there's a more widespread potential for fire in a way there wasn't previously. There's lots of work that has been done. Certainly when I was there, there's work that's been done to mitigate the impacts of that. People are thinking about it. People are putting in place measures to deal with it. But again, I think when I reflect back on that experience, if I was there at day one, I think it's something that I'd also want to start thinking about as soon as possible, so that we could start to put in place the process to deal with that as soon as we can. Yeah, on to those are my three observations. The one initiative which I think stuck out to me in 2019 was to do with treating bamboo, improve the longevity of the material. So if you think about having to bring bamboo to site, there's always this need to kind of replace it because structures are damaged or bamboo gets deteriorated or structures are destroyed But in the case of sort of deterioration to the material, if you can extend the longevity of it, you can potentially reduce the amount of material that you need. So that's what these treatment plants started to do in 2019. And I'm sure that process has been refined considerably since that time. But this is an example of a Danish Refugee Council treatment plant, which I was able to visit in 2019. So these sorts of facilities, they provide an opportunity for employment and income generation for the surrounding population. So they have that benefit. I suppose on the con side, depending on the chemicals used, there's potential for leaching into water supply and soil and potential environmental damage that people need to be aware of. However, I think in Cox's Bazar, so much of what is done is tightly controlled that you would anticipate that there will be mechanisms that can be used to control that process as well. Although I wasn't sure in my own mind in 2019 if we yet got to that stage. It felt a bit like people were doing something, but maybe there wasn't a sort of overarching view of how to do it properly. And finally, going back to the 2023, I think it was, shelter strategy paper. So we looked at the reliance of bamboo, and we considered that maybe diversifying the response was a way to start to lessen that reliance to some degree, and therefore lessen some of the impacts of using only bamboo or mainly bamboo for shelters. And one of the things we started to look at was soil as a potential material. We brought in Krater, who many of you will know, who are soil specialists. They came to Cox's Bazar. We took soil samples from all around the camps, and we organised workshops for NGOs to come and learn about soil testing to help us with that process. And then we also we developed sort of model ways of building the soil that helped to reduce the amount of bamboo used. And the idea was that would then go on to develop some sense of what a new type of shelter could be. I think COVID-19 probably got in the way of that process and halted it to some degree. But I think also it wasn't clear to me that actually we had the type of soil and the quantities that we needed to be able to do this at scale. This kind of brings us back to the scale problem. You may have a solution in place, but actually when you start to look at it across the whole entire camp, it's not really feasible, or it may not be feasible. So yeah, I guess scale is a big consideration. There's lots of things to think around that, and I guess for me, I just try to keep in mind what are those things that I'm not thinking about that I should be thinking about. And these are some of the lessons I learned from that thought. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have time now for a few questions. Does anyone want to? Yeah.
I asked about the longevity of a naturally untreated, like bamboo shelter, and how frequently the repairs and maintenance need to be made in each case.
Yeah, no, you're testing my memory.
Yeah, ballpark.
So it might be a better place to answer this question, actually. But I think if you'd asked me then, I probably could tell you. If you asked me now, it's probably not present. Yeah, I can certainly find out for you. And there may be people here who can actually give you more recent understanding. But I mean, it's the main point I think to take away is that there's a constant need to replace, and even with the treated bamboo, it only lasts a certain amount of time, and it also is dependent on the way the structures have been built. How much is water and impact on the base of the structure and what have you. So you'll still need to keep replenishing supply no matter.
And I'm getting it's not like it's shorter scale
In terms of
lasting. It's just we're not talking like long term.
oh no, we're talking sort of. I guess we're talking about extending the duration a bit longer than it would otherwise be. But it's not like still 10 years or.
Well, couldn't it? I mean, aren't there examples of it going for 80 years, 100 years, if it is away from the water, as he says, if it's not getting wet?
You need big boots, big hat.
Big roots, big hat, yeah. So, in some of the on the IOM side of the camps are split by IOM, UDCR, zones, whatever. On the IOM side, the shelter team brought in a metal footing, which we should have a picture of, really. I don't know if it was there when you were there, but you dig a big hole like a foundation, stick a metal platform there, and it comes up 2 arms with holes, and you bolt through the base of the bamboo, so it's up off the ground, and it's pretty smart. And in other places, you would put it on a stone or on something that could leach away the water or something, but it's raised up off the ground. And I was telling Seb that there's now the shelter sector technical team who are still there are looking at doing an evaluation now in the next year at how long the tested have lasted how long the untreated and treated, because on the UNHCR side, they're still using untreated in some cases. We know which ones we use untreated, so we should, within a year or two, have some pretty solid evidence. And this is such a good example. I'm so glad that you've, because it's the biggest application of bamboo in a refugee settlement ever, in any refugee dining situation ever. So for data and research, this is a gold mine in this, and we haven't been allowed to use mud because the government says no. So computer says no. When it does that, you can't go forward, even if there are in Camp 2W, there's a whole bunch of mud shelters that are really nice, but government's been a little pain.
But still in this, if you are gonna measure the lifespan of untreated bamboo, you also need to consider when it was, how it was harvested, because that will be affecting also the lifespan, even if it is untreated, if it is harvested properly. And
At the
with
right time of the
good
year.
maturity and the good time, then it will last longer than if untreated. So there are so many factors.
I think
that
is
need to
what
be
Sam
considered.
talked about, like when he said the unmanaged supply, whatever, people just cutting whatever, and then you were getting poor. So it does make a
Poor
difference
pipe,
though
yeah.
when you cut it.
Definitely. And there are actually ancient, all the many traditions are cutting the bamboo at a specific time, and it is repeated in different places in the world that they always cut on the new moon.
Yeah.
You never see this in any book. They cut it, the mature one, the one 3-4 years old, but on the new ones.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of science behind it
Yeah,
and wisdom,
Yeah, totally.
to
I
ensure
was
that
just
the
going to
lifespan.
ask as well, if, and it's something we're going to actually bring up later, if this was another country, it wasn't like Bangladesh, because from Bangladesh, sorry, from other parts of South Asia, you import from Bangladesh because it's some of the best producers in the South Asia region. So if it had happened in a part of Myanmar, maybe not, but Nepal, India, Pakistan, you wouldn't have access to such vast amounts of high quality bamboo. So if 1 million people in a city was to pop up in another place, what would be our material of choice? I wonder, huh? Right, and it would, so it's in a way horses for courses. We're in a bamboo country made with bamboo.
Yeah, I think one thing I say about the bamboo in that scenario is it's probably a least bad option. You know,
Yeah.
You could use lots of other materials potentially, but they're probably all even worse impacts than bamboo. So the thing you need to do is try and refine the process to use as little bamboo as possible. And that speaks to the designs that you use, the way that you build them. The problem with the longevity, and the reason why I would suggest that they don't, even when treated bamboo, theoretically it could be lasting a long time, but there's so many other factors at play when it's harvested, if it's in the water or not, how close it is to the next shelter, and if that shelter then running water off their roof onto the wall of the other shelter. So people putting sandbags up to the base of the wall so the water runs away from the wall, but that then comes up above the metal that you put in the ground to hold them. So there's so many factors in play that unless it's done extremely precisely, some organizations do, you're going to have a problem. And even when it is done precisely, people still go and live there. People still then inhabit these places, and things happen that are beyond the control of shelter agencies. So the perfect scenario is probably difficult to achieve in that particular environment.
That picture behind you is a kind of well-controlled, perfect example. On the left, the raised up off the ground, sandbags or whatever, to raise it up, the one on the left side. And they'll probably last longer. It's a really good point.
But it's combining timber.
Is that timber? Okay, but let's assume.
No, but it's, that
And
is,
then I'd say also the government, which I didn't talk about really, but that is a major factor. Like something you just can't do, as was mentioned, because the government just says no, and there would be good ideas, and then people do and have negotiated, and the reason why the shelters became what they became is because of that process. But there were things that people would have liked to do they couldn't do and probably still can't do because it smacks too much of permanence for the government, and they don't like that idea.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to have to stop you there, and I know you've got a
I'm
meeting
gonna have to go,
now,
yeah, sorry, but I'll
but
come
Sam's
back.
going to head off, and then he's coming back. So if you've got any questions for him, do grab him later in the day. So thank you so much.